Welcome to this webinar on mainstreaming gender equality in budgeting and planning processes for enhanced implementation of agriculture sector priorities in NDCs and NAPs. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome all of you. My name is Sybil Nelson. I am a lead program advisor at FAO headquarters in Rome. I support climate action in countries focusing on the agriculture sector, and I support gender mainstreaming as part of climate solutions. My colleague Julie Tang with UNDP, who is the coordinator of the Scala program together with FAO, will be moderating this event with me. So this session is co-organized by FAO and UNDP. We work together in a program called Scala to support climate action in 12 and counting countries. We are supported generously by the German government through its International Climate Initiative. I would like to thank in particular the Paris Committee on Capacity Building Network for the opportunity to have this space. Thank you for hosting, and thank you for your efforts overall to really help improve capacity in the response to climate change. And actually, since we have this opportunity to bring together so many different stakeholders from different backgrounds, we wanted to take a moment and ask you to please, if you'd like, introduce yourself in the chat. Please share your name, where you're coming from, where you work, and even and especially what your level of expertise on gender planning is. We're curious to understand what's the starting point. I'm sure if you're here, you're already convinced of the importance to address gender and social inclusion in the response to climate, and we're really glad you're here. And while people are taking a moment to write in the chat, I just wanted to make a few housekeeping points. So this session is being recorded. It will be shared online along with the presentations afterwards. During the sessions, we're pleased to hear questions from you. Please, at the top of your screen, you'll see there is a Q&A function. Please feel welcome to type your questions, and we'll have an opportunity for the speakers to reply. I think with that, please do continue to introduce yourselves in the chat. I do see we have a colleague from FAO in Rome. We have a colleague from Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome to all. Oh, we have a gender inclusion focal point, so we have some strong expertise in the room. Fantastic. Kosovo, excellent. A wide range already. So with that, it is now my honor to pass the floor to Ms. Rosabel Martinez of the Paris Committee on Capacity Building. She is the lead of Working Group 2 on cross-cutting issues. So over to you for the opening remarks.
Thank you, Sybil. Thank you, everybody. My name is Rosibel Martinez, and I am a member of the Paris Committee on Capacity Building as the lead of the Working Group 2 on cross-cutting issues. I would like to warmly welcome you to this event, Mainstreaming Gender Equality in Budgeting and Planning Processes for Enhanced Implementation of Agriculture Sector Priorities in NDCs and NAPs. This event is led by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, FAO, and the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, through the Scaling Up Climate Ambition and Land Use and Agriculture SCALA program, with support from the Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action, BMWK, through the International Climate Initiative. I know there's a lot of acronyms, but it's important to mention them all. We have an interesting panel of speakers today, and I'm looking forward to hearing about the gender mainstreaming process, particularly as it relates to the implementing NDCs and NAPs in the agriculture sectors. So before we go into the theme of this event and introduce our panelists, I'd like to quickly introduce you to the PCCB, or the Paris Committee on Capacity Building. Established at COP21, the PCCB seeks to address current and emerging gaps in the needs in implementing and further enhancing capacity building in developed countries. The mission of the PCCB is to identify capacity gaps and needs and potential solutions, enhancing the coherence and coordination of capacity building efforts related to climate change. To support the PCCB's mission and mandate, the committee launched the PCCB Network in 2020 as a voluntary association of interested stakeholders engaged in climate-related capacity building. The PCCB network provides a platform to share information and best practices, contributes to the work of fulfilling the PCCB's mandate, and seeks to connect with its peer across sectors and regions. As of today, the network unites 307 organizations where several areas of capacity building in the context of climate change action are addressed among the network members.
Rosabel, you're on mute. Just a quick thing, you're on mute.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Was I muted a long time or just recently?
Just a couple of seconds, 5, 6 seconds.
Okay, I'm sorry. So the PCCB regularly mobilizes the expertise of its network members with events like this one, but also at the regional level through PCCB side events, at the UNFCCC Regional Climate Week, such as the Latin American Climate Week, which I moderated last July, and the recent Africa Climate Week, who was moderated by another colleague from as a PCCB member. To learn more about the PCCB network or how to become a member and its collaboration possibilities as a member, follow the link on the chat. I think Reedy is going to help us with that. So today, the theme of today's event is centered around gender and national adaptation plans and nationally determined contribution. Within that topic, though, we'll be paying special attention to the agriculture sector. Climate goals are focusing more and more on land use and agriculture, but that requires major transformation, especially to promote gender equality and social inclusion. Marginalized groups are more vulnerable to the effects of climate change, yet they have so much knowledge that can be contribute to find climate solutions. When looking at the NAPs and the NDCs, it's clear that countries are taking steps to promote gender equality and social inclusion, but more can be done. I'm excited to hear about the progress made through the programs like the NAP AG and SCALA programs, which have experience in gender mainstreaming in budgeting and planning processes for the planning and implementation of agriculture sector priorities. And we have a wide range of speakers from Uganda and Kenya to the USA. So I'm looking forward to this fruitful discussion that we'll be having this morning. This morning or wherever time region you are at. So finally, on behalf of the PCCB, I would like to thank FAO and UNDP for the work done through the SCALA program, as well as the BMWK and the IKI for collaboration in this event. Thank you all as well to our speaker and our audience. So it's now back to you, Sybil. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Rosabel. Thank you for kicking us off here. And again, thank you to the network for hosting this event. Thank you. For those of you just joining, you are welcome to introduce yourself in the chat. And as we go, you're also welcome to use the Q&A function at the top to ask questions of the speakers, and which we'll get to in just a few minutes. So I think we all know why we're here. We all understand that achieving climate-related goals, in particular in land use and agriculture, requires transformation of systems so that we have gender equality and social inclusion, not only to address differences in vulnerability, but also to build upon the knowledge, needs, and insights of different groups, as Rosabel was saying. Within the context of climate planning on the international stage, the recent reviews of national adaptation plans and nationally determined contributions, which we can use as an indicator of where countries want to go, they're showing great progress on gender equality and social inclusion. For example, a recent FAO analysis shows that 38% of the most recent NDCs reference gender in the agriculture sectors compared to 9% of the previous set. So that's a huge increase. And the NAP Global Network has shown that 97% of developing countries that have submitted NAPs integrate gender, and 2/3 of these are include references to capacity building on these issues. So I think this session connects with that emerging priority. So this is all great news, but of course, room for improvement, not only in climate planning, but in the implementation. How can we be sure that the goals we've set forth will achieve this gender responsive, gender transformative change? So with today's session, we hope to exchange on just that question. And in particular, we want to look at entry points in the NDC and NAP processes for mainstreaming gender. We want to hone in on budgeting process as a really critical entry point on gender responsive action. And we hope to also highlight some of the links between national and local action, because it will take action at all levels to achieve these goals. Today we have exceptional speakers. I'm so excited to hear from them. They all have really rich backgrounds and things to share. So just quickly to give an overview of the agenda so that we can just jump right in. So the first part of the webinar will be on addressing gender and climate goals through policy and community action. We will have the honor to hear from Honorable Winifred Masiko from Uganda, and then from Peter Wright, who's from CARE USA based in Niger. In the second part of the webinar, we will be talking about integrating gender and budgeting for climate action. And we will have speakers including Jane Rubin from Kenya, Shanaz Browerman, who's based in South Africa, and Rebecca Rewald from Oxfam America. Again, you will have time to ask questions, and please do use the Q&A function. So with that, I would love to pass the floor now to my co-moderator, Julie Tang. She's the Global Program Coordinator for the SCALA program at UNDP. Over to you, Julie.
Thank you, Sibyl. This is really an exciting lineup indeed, and I'm really pleased to introduce the first speaker, who's Honorable Winifred Masiko from the Ugandan Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development. She's the National Program Coordinator of the Joint Program on Youth Livelihood and Uganda Women Entrepreneurship. She's also the Uganda Focal Point on Gender and the Climate Change for the UNFCCC, and she's also the coordinator of Gender and Climate Change Working Group for the least developed countries. She used to be a member of parliament as well for 12 years. So as you can see, her insights are going to be invaluable. Honorable Masiko, we're very pleased to hear from you. Could you please share with us what the government of Uganda's approach is on gender and climate planning, and how gender equality is promoted in the implementation of climate action in NAP and NDC priorities in Uganda? Over to you.
So Julie is we're going to flip the order of speakers. Julie, back to you.
So thank you, Mr. Wright, for agreeing to take the first spot. You're senior technical advisor on climate resilient agriculture at CARE USA, but currently based in Niger, as mentioned earlier by Sibyl. So Mr. Wright contributes to food and water systems program development and support, and leads the working group for resilience and sustainability with a focus on the integration of women's empowerment, inclusive local governance, and resilience building for sustainable outcomes in locally led development. He has lived and worked in Africa since 1974. So I'm turning to you now. Based on your experience, could you tell us about CARE's approach to gender equality and some examples of approaches to promoting women's engagement in local governance for sustainable solutions? Over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. CARE has a number of frameworks that we use for gender equality, and I'm going to actually present very briefly two of those frameworks. One is for gender equality, that's based on three main components, which is an individual's agency to act to their own benefit. It also includes the ability to work with others in relationships to improve circumstances, and also to work and improve the enabling environment that they are working within. So that's one of the elements that I'll present today. Okay, if you're going into the presentation, then I can go straight into that. Okay, here you have in the three orange circles, you have those three components of the gender equality framework: agency, relations, and the enabling structure. And one of the tools here are in the yellow boxes with green text. The main tool that I'm going to present and talk about today is the Vsla, Village Savings and Loan. And in Niger, we've been working with these, supporting Vsla for over 30 years. It's a rich experience that they've had here with these groups as they've evolved and matured. And these are the results of some of this experience is what we're actually going to present to you today. In the next frame, in the next image, please. Here we have the inclusive governance, oh, excuse me, too far. The CARES inclusive governance framework, and that's presented in the triangle on the left-hand side. And this basically is showing, oh, that's interesting. This is basically showing the effective actors in a given arena of empowered citizens when they are able to work with public authorities and other power holders to achieve sustainable development. One of the key ingredients to do that, to bring those interactions together, is an expanded and inclusive space for these negotiations to happen. And that's what has given birth to the multi-stakeholder platforms that are depicted here with the yellow box and green text. These are also developed in Niger about 7 years ago. And basically they consist of community level experts, local experts that have been trained in all sorts of climate smart agricultural practices, income generating practices, livestock practices, and whatnot. And they constitute the basis of these platforms, and they are then aggregated into clusters at the multi-village level, and then from there aggregated into a communal level structure. That's at the lowest administrative level, the communes here in Niger. We've been working with them for about 7 years, and so that's the other experience we'll be depicting here in this presentation. And those multi-stakeholder platforms have a heavy presence of Vsla in them as well. Next slide, please. Here we're going to talk about the Vsla involvement in community pasture management and how they've improved the governance of that management. Briefly describe the community pasture management plans. They involve restoring and reseeding degraded pasture lands in the communities that have been designated as pasture areas, but have been degraded over the years from overexploitation. So there are two aspects to it: restoring that pasture land through physical and biological means, and then setting up a management system for that to avoid the degradation from reoccurring. And in the two columns that you have below here, we have on the left-hand side some levers or drivers for that adoption. This is kind of the contextual issues that have brought us to develop the community pasture lands. On the right-hand side, you will have ways in which the Vsla's participation in the pasture management have improved that governance and especially contributed to sustainability. I'll let you just skim through these, what's written under these title heads here. But take note of the presence of the women's Vsla actually triggering this development. In the left-hand column, they are part of the one of the main drivers for this activity. And in the right-hand column, you'll just see all of the diversity of ways in which they have contributed to the good management of these pasture lands through a diversity of skills, leadership, vision, etc. And last but not least, the accountability, so that when money is actually received through receipts of the sale of fodder, that money doesn't go unaccounted for into someone's pocket, but rather it goes back into the pasture management to sustain it. Next slide, please. Okay, here's the same sort of description, but for the multi-stakeholder platforms. These, as I was saying, are consist of community level talented farmers who are able to train other farmers in climate resilience practices, income generating activities, livestock and whatnot, and they are aggregated up to higher levels all the way up to the communal level to form a platform that links up with the authorities and technical services at that higher level. Again, on the left-hand side, you see some of the contextual elements that led to the creation of these platforms. And high up on that list are the Vsla, again, kind of driving the creation and helping the creation of these platforms right from the start. And on the right-hand side, you have, again, this diversity of contributions the Vsla are making within these platforms to ensure that they actually function and sustainable on a sustainable basis. I'll give you just a moment to skim through these, what we've typed in these two columns here. I think we have enough time for that. Okay, on to the next slide. Here are some indications on the sustainability of these activities. As regards the community pasture management, we've noted that 7 years after external support has ended for the initial pasture management experiments, those sites are still being managed sustainably. We see that receipts from the sales of fodder are sufficient to cover costs and generate a surplus for the community. So much so that this social enterprise model being used to manage these pasture areas is being expanded within this particular administrative area and also elsewhere, I would add. The local government in that area has received about $2,000 in receipts from 10 pasture management sites that have been subsequently set up in that area. And they're going to use that money to reinvest. And the local government is so interested in how this is functioning, they want to form a pasture management network that will link all of these pasture management sites together to do a more collective and holistic planning and investment in pasture management. So things seem to be boding well for these community management areas in this part of Niger. For the multi-stakeholder platforms, again, excuse me, go. There you go. For the multi-stakeholder platforms, again, we see 3 years after withdrawal of external funding, the initial platforms are still operating. They're running fee-based enterprises and providing services to their members. They're doing collective activities at very low cost by implementing traditional community self-help approaches that which costs the communities very little in terms of investment. These platforms have since been expanded to 40 new 40 communes in Niger with some help from extra funding, but they're also doing that expansion using the experienced people in the existing platforms to actually set up and train the new ones. We also note that membership in these platforms is expanding within each of the administrative areas, the communes, and that 40% of the members are in fact women, most of those women also from Vsla. So again, Vsla providing a very foundational aspect to these platforms. And to the next slide, please. Here are the key takeaways. This will be followed by just a few pictures and some references. But the key takeaways that I want to point out for you here is to recognize that women's Vsla are not just for women's empowerment. These Vsla are definitely able and willing to provide benefit to their entire communities. And that's what they've demonstrated here very nicely in Niger. These Vslas are further aggregated into networks and federations that leads to expanded capacities for leadership, advocacy, and management. This women from Vsla possess unique talents to sustainably manage resources and services within their communities and for the benefit of the community. The active participation of these women from Vsla is in fact an essential element for responsive, accountable, and sustainable local organizations and governance structures. I'll just add that I've been doing this kind of work for 40 years, and I have not seen anywhere where it responds, where it's local organizations and government structures are as responsive, accountable, or sustainable as I've seen them with Vsla participation. To even build further on those structures, we can link them together into platforms, as is demonstrated here, giving them the ability to drive local development. Those platforms can also achieve economies of scale for reach and greater sustainability, and they provide a unique platform for women to contribute to local planning, policy, and governance. And I think that's where that's the point of convergence with the subject of today's discussion, is when you can get these platforms to that local administrative level, these women's voices come through very strongly to help set those NDC priorities, participate also in the NAP implementations, when you can go through those platforms to reach that level of administrative level. My one recommendation is to think of women's Vsla and their participation in any and all actions that involve the management of community assets and resources. They are just so critical to sustainable management of those assets. We have just a couple pictures at the end. Next slide. These are women. This is one of their activities on the pasture areas, is harvesting palm leaves, which they sell. And of course, some of that money from those sales is plowed back into management of those pasture areas. And on the right-hand side, we have a nice little sand model of the pasture management area surrounded by villages and other climate smart agricultural practices. Those are zai pits that they've put all around the village. You see the little black pits there, which I found a very nice depiction. This is done on the school floor to show us how they're doing that. And on the very last slide, there are a couple of references that people may be interested in going to. And I'm assuming that this PowerPoint presentation will be shared out, and you should have clickable links to these references that are on this page. If not, of course, you could contact me and I could provide those. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for listening. And any questions will be welcome. Over.
Thank you very much. We will go straight into the presentation of Honorable Masiko. I think we have managed to fix the audio issue. Over to you.
I hope it's fixed.
Yeah, it sounds fine.
My apologies. I don't know what had happened, but once again, I must say that I'm very happy and excited to be part of this team, and especially to talk about the issue that's very close to my heart, gender mainstreaming, gender in different actions. So we're going to look at lessons learned on integrating gender into NDCs and NAPs planning and implementation in Uganda. You will excuse me, I'll have to remove the camera so that I don't lose the connection. So let's go ahead next. Can we go to the next slide? Yes. The outline is on policy context, steps undertaken by government of Uganda to address gender and climate change, and then how government promotes gender equality. Next. So in the policy context, Uganda there is Uganda Vision 2040. This is a vision that looks at the appropriate adaptation and mitigation strategies in Uganda to ensure that Uganda is sufficiently cushioned from any adverse impact brought by climate change. It's a very important document. This is what drives the country's planning. Then we also have the third National Development Plan, which is also a planning document. In that plan, we have captured that Uganda should follow a climate smart and low carbon development path linked to green growth and sustainable goals.
Uganda has taken steps to integrate climate change into the national development plans, as well as sector policies, plans, programs, and also has produced climate change mainstreaming guidelines, which the plan seeks to popularize. And there's also the climate change policy and its costed strategy. It also looks at how to harmonize and coordinate approaches towards climate resilient and low carbon development path for sustainable development in Uganda. Next. Also, apart from the vision we have and the climate change policy, we have the Climate Change Act. In Uganda, we already have in place a Climate Change Act, which was enacted in 2021, and it puts in effect the United Nations Convention on Climate Change, the Kyoto Protocol, and the Paris Agreement. It also provides climate change response mechanisms, both spelling out at the institutional level how the coordination is supposed to take place, and also stipulating how the country should foster climate financing. Apart from that, the country has a climate change department and the Ministry of Water and Environment. It also has the National Environment Management Authority and also has the Parliamentary Committee on Climate Change as one of the standing committees of Parliament. Also in Uganda, it has a revised NDC. Next slide. The revised NDC articulates the mitigation and adaptation measures of Uganda towards the implementation of the Paris Agreement. We can go to next slide. And also it has the National Adaptation Plan. The Readiness and Preparation Support Proposal was put in place, looking at strengthening adaptation planning in Uganda, and it has commenced and it plans to develop agenda action plan with clear indicators on how to track gender responsive actions. Also, there's a revised gender policy, the gender policy for the country, which looks at how to streamline gender in all aspects of the country, has earmarked climate change as one of the priority areas. We also have the national policy for disaster preparedness, as well as the green growth strategy, which are gender responsive. So next slide, what are the steps that the government has taken to address climate change planning? Some of the steps that the country has taken is to appoint the National Gender and Climate Change Focal Point in line with the Lima Work Program. It has also, there have been several efforts that have been put in place to do research, systematic observation, education training, public awareness, institutional strengthening, as well as specific activities that have been on the ground in agriculture sector, in the water sector, in the urban planning sector that focus on climate change and have had specific plans on gender mainstreaming. For instance, the Ministry of Agriculture has developed a 10-year climate smart agriculture program, and in this program, a chapter on gender mainstreaming is clearly stipulated. Also, the country has been able, next slide, to have several projects developed. They have a project to build resilient communities, wetland ecosystems, and associated catchments in Uganda, and also an integrating agriculture in national adaptation plans process. This is a project on the government has also, through next slide, through the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development, developed a gender unit. This gender unit is specialized in gender budgeting, and it's guided by an Equal Opportunities Commission to assess how gender mainstreaming by different sectors, plans and budgets has been put in place. This, the mandatory gender and equity certificate, which sectors have to produce, before their policy statements, before their budgets are considered, has been a very critical step that has helped to mainstream gender. Because if any ministry does not have a certificate of gender and equity, which has been given by Equal Opportunities Commission on behalf of the Ministry of Finance, they are not able to have their budgets upheld. So through that, it has helped to gender mainstream many activities in the country. Also in Uganda, gender and climate change issues are generally treated as cutting issues, and climate change related policies in Uganda have for many years been more comprehensive and gender responsive, because the gender policy has had an impact on most of the activities that take place in the country. As part of the NDC implementation plan, planning process, there has been an in-depth gender analysis. Next slide, please. And this has helped to look at gender differentiated impacts on climate change in Uganda. Next, and this has been mainly in the 6 sectors of agriculture, energy, waste, transport, forestry, water. There has been a study on these priority areas of the NDCs, and they have also proposed measures of integrating gender responsive actions. Next. We have had a symposium which attracted many organizations within and without of there, and that was the theme was gender and climate change, and this popularized the issue of gender mainstreaming in climate change discourse. Uganda has also carried out a gender analysis of the integrated landscape management and improved livelihoods and ecosystems resilience in Mount Elgon region. This is a region that is usually prone to landslides, and they have developed a gender action plan for the project. There has also been another project, the wet restoration, where gender mainstreaming and gender-based violence to ensure project implementation has been put in place, and this is a climate change project that the country is now trying to implement. There has also been several, like the climate change challenge grant, a program that has been implemented in Uganda, where they give some money between $5,000 to $10,000 support local actions, and this is usually handled by Vsla. As they say, we have vibrant schemes in Uganda, and they tend to be used in these areas. There's also the integrated landscape management project that has taken place. So also there's conservation in the savanna wetlands, capacity building of gender, and building gender responsive capacity in climate change negotiation, monitoring and evaluation system through integration in local government performance assessment and monitoring frameworks. So there are several projects also. There's another project that looks at climate resilient livelihood opportunities for women economic empowerment. This is a project by FAO, and it is in sensitive areas in Uganda. And one of the aims is to strengthen gender responsive and climate smart resilience of rural women who depend on agricultural production systems in the Karamoja and West Nile region. This is a very, very popular program and has already started to yield results. You can go to the next slide. And there has also been capacity building assessment from parishes to districts in the capital corridor. There has also been gender decision-making adaptation climate change program in Mount Elgon region in eastern part of Uganda. So these are some of the programs that have that the government has used to promote gender equality in the implementation of the national adaptation plans as well as the NDCs. I think I'll stop there, but in conclusion, Uganda has enhanced gender and climate goals through policy and community actions, but still more is needed. Gender as a cross-cutting issue has been addressed in various activities that fall under the NDCs and NAPs. So that's what I can present from Uganda, but I must say that, yes, the issue of gender in streaming in the country is something that has a high priority in all sectors. Thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Honorable Masiko, for recalling the framework in Uganda and showing how gender has really been mainstreamed across all the strategies and policies and how it's been really seen as a cross-cutting important issue. I was also really interested in learning from Peter about how CARE is working to get the voices of local communities and giving us concrete ideas as to how to do it and how important that is to be able to get the priorities right, first for the NAP and NDCs, but also to scale up the implementation. Because we're a bit late, we will skip the Q&A for now, but you will be able to ask questions in the chat and a bit later on. So back to Sibyl. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you to our speakers. I thought it was a really interesting combination, two different places, and two different approaches, right? Two different starting points, but coming up with some similar issues. And really, I feel like if we were to take some of your ideas, there's no one size fits all for gender mainstreaming, but if we could implement in a lot of places those local level and national level actions, we have a big impact. So thank you for all of those rich lessons learned. And now it's time to move to the second part of our webinar. This next portion focuses on integrating gender in budgeting for climate action. Our first speaker in this part is Miss Jane Njeri. She's from the Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock, Fisheries and Cooperatives in Kenya. She works in the Climate Change Unit of the State Department for Crops Development and Agricultural Research. Ms. Njeri and her colleagues at the ministry have been collaborating with some of my FAO colleagues in Kenya on a really exciting and important project. I'm so happy she could join us because she's going to speak about the development of gender and social inclusion planning and budgeting guidelines within the NAP process. And so over to you, please share with us your and the ministry's experience in strengthening capacity on gender and social inclusion planning and budgeting. The floor is yours.
Thank you. It's in the evening here. Good evening, everyone, and morning to those ones that are in the morning. Like she's alluded, I'm Jane Njeri, working in the Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock. And just recently, we were also working with the Department for Fisheries. So I work in the Climate Change Unit, where we address matters climate change in the agriculture sectors, that is in adaptation and also a bit of mitigation, also integration of gender and social inclusion. Am I audible?
Yes, you sound great.
Okay. Where we also integrate gender and social inclusion to enhance the resilience, because what has come from the surveys that we've made is that we lose out if we ignore issues, gender and social inclusion in our activities or in our productivity. Thank you. Maybe you could go to the first slide, kindly. So, like the moderator has alluded, the genesis of the gender and social inclusion planning and budgeting guidelines was carried out in partnership with FAO under the NAP Readiness Initiative. And we had key informants from all the country, from all over the country. That is through the counties. We have counties in Kenya. And we were able to identify or establish what are these gaps that were existing and also the needs, and which informed now the development of guidelines, the gender and social inclusion guidelines for budgeting for the climate change. and be able to also to advance our agenda on climate adaptation investment. Thank you. Next slide. I would like to give a background, although although this has been alluded by the earlier speaker from Uganda. We also have policies that are working for us, that is trying to adapt, trying to address matters climate change. We have several risks, and right now we've had continuous failing seasons, that is the rain season. So we have several risks and vulnerabilities, and especially so for the special groups that suffer, that really impact very seriously on them because of limitations of the gender inequalities, and they exist along the functions of the value chain. That is from where the acquisition of inputs, production level, until even to the end tail of that agricultural value chain. That is where there is utilization. So there are all these inequities along that production, I would say, value chain, the agricultural value chain. And gender is one of the major factors that is holding back agriculture productivity, and that this perpetuates poverty and hunger. And as some analysis done is that there is a gender gap of 20 to 30% yield gap between men and women. Why so? Because again of the inequalities that are there in terms of the economic empowerment, land access, and all the other resources that are required for the agricultural productivity. And then we have the gender patterns of behavior, the engendered patterns of behavior, which determines the role of men, women, youth, and the people living with the disability, all these special groups that we have, and the distribution of resources and benefits derived from income generating activities in agricultural value chain. The threats of climate change has continued compounding gender inequalities and affect the special groups differently due to their social roles and responsibility, and also access of these resources in agriculture. The government of Kenya, that is GOK, has developed some policies, but I would like to note that the policies and strategies of these special groups, but there has been a link, there have been a weak point. I would say there is a weak point on the matters planning and budgeting for the same. Okay, next slide, please. So the key objectives that we were able to generate from this exercise is that we would be able to achieve if we, through this, the integration of the budget planning and budgeting, we would be able to reduce inequalities and exclusion by advancing equality of opportunity and fostering good relationship between different groups with characteristics such as the age group, disability, and marginalization, because of different areas or ecological zones for productivity. And then we had a promotion of gender equality and social inclusion across the agriculture sector, which is low for now. And then the capacity building of the national and county public, okay, with skills and knowledge on mainstreaming gender and budgeting process for enhanced climate adaptation. Next slide, please. We found there was a lot of justification, but maybe just a summary. The excluded groups are on the forefront line of agriculture as key actors who have vital knowledge of their community, the environment, and the experiences in climate change. And the excluded groups, i.e. women, female youth, have the experience and the opportunities to best identify climate resilient agricultural solution. However, if they must be, they need to be empowered to be able to benefit the country. Like the saying goes, whatever is not done with us is not for us. Next slide, please. we were able, we were able to identify the gender gaps, and why do we thought that or what came out of the whole analysis is that when we carried out the interviews is that it hinders the gender gaps hinders agricultural productivity and reduces even the contribution and achievement towards our goals of Vision 2030 and other broad economic and social development goals. Youths in Kenya, that is 18 to 34 years, who comprise of about 25% of the population, are alienated, or it's not lucrative to be practicing agriculture simply because of the exclusion or the several factors, that insufficient access to land, markets, input, financial services, and ultimately limited involvement in policy dialogue, aggravating the unemployment status in the country. To notice that Kenya has agriculture as a backbone of the country, and hence has a lot of this opportunity, which we minus the exclusion of this vital group, that is the youth, then we reduce the unemployment opportunities that would be there. Inadequate participation in decision making, access to resource and opportunities that are needed in committing, that are able to move us towards the climate change adaptation by 2030. Next slide, please. The gender and social inclusion gaps and challenges that were also analyzed from the interviewees was that there was inadequate technical capacity, lack of skills and knowledge on how to mainstream gender and social inclusion issues in the country. That is in the county level where we are implementing agriculture. That is from the executive even to the field, to the extension officers. Lack of adequate sex and gender data to support planning and budget process at all level of governance levels, either sub-counties or the counties where we are implementing agriculture. Lack of skills to undertake gender and social inclusion analysis, including collection of gender and sex disaggregated information. Lack of political will amongst the leaders, that is also came out very key. Next, please. That is continuation of the gaps and challenges. Lack of the gender and social inclusion guidelines and checklists and budget tracking tools, which is very vital because this is supposed to feed back into what we are doing and see whether what are we doing right, what is working for us, what is not working for us. And then the lack of gender and social inclusion specialists to support the technical team, because most of us are technically trained in the agricultural field, but not in the gender. And then limited knowledge on how to identify the needs of women, youth, and the people living with disability, all these special groups that we need to cater for. Lack of a gender-sensitive and social-inclusive monitoring and evaluation framework and guideline, that's another area. And then lack of gender policy to guide implementation at all levels, and especially at the county where the implementation takes place. And then low number of female hired at level of planning and budgeting and decision-making, and especially at the executive level where the decisions are made. And then poor turnout of the public participation, where the advocacy for adaptation interventions that are supposed to take place, and where we are supposed also to do the annual development plan and all that, and the county integrated
Bueno, entonces tenemos hasta las 8:30, ¿verdad? Van a ser 36. Muchos ejercicios.
Mind the gap.
Unfortunately, we can't hear you. Can you hear us? Yes, I think she's lost her connection.
I think we lost the speaker, so we'll try to see if we can get her
Okay.
reconnected.
Okay, I think while we're working on that, we could move on. I think the speaker lost her connection. Unfortunately, we were about to hear, we were set with the context and about to hear some of the details. So I will hope to get her back, and I think we should go ahead to our next speaker. Will be speaking on the same topic and giving us some sort of how-to explanations, I think, of where there are entry points, some lessons that can be applied in different contexts. So Shanaz, if you're ready, our next speaker is Ms. Shanaz Browerman. She is the Program Manager for the Inclusive Budgeting and Financing for Climate Change in Africa program. She works at the Collaborative Africa Budget Reform Initiative, CABRI, in South Africa. She has work experience with the federal government of Ethiopia and the government of the Gambia. So we're really curious to hear from you because the program you manage supports an integrated approach to mainstreaming both gender and climate change into public financial management systems. So we're really happy to give you the floor and hear about your findings and the support your team is providing to governments. So over to you, Shanaz.
Great, thanks, Sybil. And good afternoon to everyone. It's really a great pleasure to be with you today and be part of these very important discussions. So if we could just go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to share with you some insights from our Inclusive Budgeting and Financing for Climate Change in Africa program. So it's led by the Collaborative Africa Budget Reform Initiative, CABRI, in partnership with UNDP and IIED and with the support from CEDA. So the primary objective of the program is to support an integrated approach to mainstreaming gender and climate change into public financial management systems, a term we refer to as double mainstreaming or gender responsive climate budgeting. So since the start of the program in October 2020, we have engaged over 20 African governments on double mainstreaming gender and climate change. And what we've seen is that most countries have some experience in either gender responsive budgeting or climate responsive budgeting. However, the two have largely been implemented as two separate reform agendas. However, there is now growing recognition of the benefits of an integrated approach, which could help ensure the more efficient, effective, and equitable use of climate finance. This move is partly supported by the similarities in the approaches and technical tools used for gender responsive budgeting and climate responsive budgeting. And of course, it could facilitate access to additional international climate finance. So social equality has become one of the key criteria for accessing international climate finance from the main global funds, such as the Green Climate Fund and the Global Environment Facility. And access to international climate funds is particularly important for Africa, as a recent UNDP study on Africa's expenditure on adaptation shows that domestic resources alone are going to be inadequate in the short to medium term to meet Africa's climate financing needs. Next slide, please. So we developed a framework which identifies the entry points for gender responsive climate budgeting, and these span the entire budget cycle. So this ranges from strategic planning, budget formulation and approval, budget execution, accounting and monitoring, audit and evaluation, and policy review. Climate change can also be mainstreamed into other important climate policy and PFM interfaces such as debt instruments. This includes green bonds and debt swaps, revenue policy, and budget support. Next slide. So the tools used to advance gender responsive climate budgeting build on the tools used for the single mainstreaming of either gender or climate change. And I've picked just a few here as examples. I will share in the chat the brief where we outline different tools that can be used through which span the entire budget cycle. So for instance, here with coordinating institutions, there should be cross-representation between gender and climate change coordination bodies and technical collaboration of focal points for consistency. And when it comes to impact assessment, it should integrate in one tool an assessment of the dynamic intersectional linkages between gender and climate and the implications of outcomes and impact. And finally, if we look at budget tagging and scoring, both gender budget tagging and climate budget tagging should be undertaken simultaneously to ensure consistency and build awareness. Next slide, please. So when we look at country experiences, I think we have to remember that gender responsive budgeting is still an emerging area globally. However, governments in Africa have found innovative ways to integrate gender and climate change into their national planning and budgeting systems. Although at the moment, I should highlight that this experience is limited to strategic planning and budget formulation. So leading the way with related reforms is Nigeria, Rwanda, Uganda, as we just heard from Honorable Winnie, and Eswatini, who have introduced joint gender and climate change strategies and plans, which are aligned with international frameworks, including the UNFCCC Gender Action Plan. So next slide, please. So while gender responsive climate budgeting often focuses on integrating gender into climate change policies and plans, Eswatini's approach goes beyond this by integrating climate change into their gender policies and plans. So in 2019, Eswatini began a process to review their 2010 National Gender Policy, and the draft policy includes the thematic area on the environment, natural resources, and climate change. And the government commits to ensuring that environment and climate change policies, programs, and action plans consider gender-related issues in terms of access control, benefits, and the management of natural resources. It also commits to providing education, training, and capacity building on the intersections between gender and climate change. Next slide, please. So in Rwanda, the 2021 revised national gender policy demands that gender is mainstream across all sectors, including the environment and climate change. So the 2019 environment and climate change policy includes gender mainstreaming. So in addition to integrating gender and climate change into the national planning processes, Rwanda's Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning has also developed tools to ensure that gender and climate change are included in budget formulation. So the Planning and Budget Call Circular provides guidelines for the inclusion of gender and climate change in the plans and programs of ministries and agencies. And since 2013, Rwanda has issued gender budget statements, and from this year onwards, it will be complemented by the Environment and Climate Change Budget Statement, and this will include climate change and gender-related interventions. And according to the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning, related reforms have contributed to the increased allocation towards environment, climate change, and gender in the national budget. Next slide, please. So another key component of budget formulation includes gender and climate change impact appraisal. So although countries in Africa have had limited experience with this, it can improve the design and appraisal of new programs, allowing the prioritization of programs which contribute to both gender equality and climate mitigation and adaptation, including, increasing the effectiveness of both of them. So last year, through the program, Benin piloted a new gender and climate change impact appraisal method, which builds on the methods of climate change impact assessment. And it was piloted in the agriculture and energy sectors. And the results from the assessment showed that taking gender and climate change into consideration can increase the component benefits of the program. So I won't talk about Uganda because Honorable Winnie already gave us an excellent outline of all the amazing progress the country's made. So I'll just end now with some of the lessons that have come through from our experience so far. And that is that gender and climate change are two important cross-sectoral priorities which are essential to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. However, strengthening overall public financial management systems is central to improved gender-responsive climate budgeting. Related reforms should therefore not be done in isolation of broader public financial management reforms. And we also see that successful countries have responded to country needs, and these have been implemented gradually over time. I think it's clear that the long history countries have with either gender budgeting or climate budgeting offers an opportunity to learn from and build on this experience due to the complementarity between gender and climate change, which makes use of similar approaches and techniques. And as already mentioned by Ms. Njeri from Kenya, the availability of gender-responsive monitoring, evaluation, and learning systems that provide sex disaggregated data is particularly important in order to track, monitor, and evaluate gender and climate expenditure, as well as the effectiveness of adaptation responses for the groups most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Finally, climate accountability and transparency can be enhanced through better engagement and capacity building of key formal and informal accountability actors, including parliaments, supreme audit institutions, civil society, women's groups, academia, the media, and so on. And this can really help stimulate the demand for gender-responsive climate budgeting. So, yeah, thanks very much for letting us share some of the lessons, and I hand you back to the moderator.
Thank you so much for this very clear presentation. I think you've really helped demystify some of these terms and what it means and make clear some concrete steps. So thank you very much for that, and excellent results in such a short amount of time. Really exciting to see. So next we're going to move to the next speaker, who is Rebecca Rewald from Oxfam America, and then we'll complete Jane's presentation from before. So I would like to introduce you to Rebecca Rewald. She is the Senior Gender Policy Advisor at Oxfam America. She manages the unpaid and underpaid care work portfolio. And previously, she provided gender support to Oxfam country offices and affiliates working on agriculture advocacy. And this included some research on gender responsive budgeting, which we're going to hear about today. So far, we've been speaking more about, efforts led at the national level. And so I'm really curious to hear from you, Rebecca, what have been your findings and how we can make gender responsive budgeting work for women small scale farmers as well. So over to you.
Thank you, Sybil. It's nice to be here with everyone. Thank you for this opportunity, and I'm excited to talk about our research at Oxfam, which I think complements the previous two presentations really nicely. So we can go to the next slide, which provides a bit of background around the project that we conducted this research under, which is our Together Against Poverty project. While this research was being completed, these were the three main objectives of that project. And as you can see, the first objective is around increasing and improving public financing for agriculture in 5 African countries. So because of that, we became really interested in looking at gender responsive budgeting and how we could use GRB as a tool for making sure governments were creating agriculture budgets and budgets more broadly that were responding to the needs of women farmers in particular. So we conducted research in Ethiopia, Ghana, and Tanzania in 2019 and 2020. And once the research was completed, we were able to create a synthesis report that took sort of all of the lessons learned and synthesized them into a smaller report that gave you sort of bite-sized pieces of the main findings in the different countries. At the end of the presentation, I will provide links to the synthesis report as well as the 3 country reports. Next slide. So when looking at the synthesis report, these were sort of the 5 areas that we looked at. I'm going to talk about the first three areas in this presentation. First, around setting up government practices, systems, and structures in order to be able to carry out gender-responsive budgeting. Also talking about what a gender-responsive budgeting process looks like and engaging citizens in the budgeting process. Next slide. So under the first area that I'll be talking about, I'll pull out some main findings here. You can click next. The first one is that I think, this is probably obvious to a lot of folks, but we need evidence and data in these countries to be able to create budgets that are responsive to the needs of people of different genders. I think that was a big challenge that we saw in all three countries. Not having adequate data to be able to understand kind of the needs of women farmers, was a big barrier in being able to create budgets that responded to those needs. Next. In addition to looking at these countries specifically and conducting stakeholder interviews, we also did a literature review to look at where gender responsive budgeting has been successful. And we found countries like Uganda, as was previously mentioned, have had more success in gender responsive budgeting than others. And we found that, although it's really important to have gender and gender mainstream policies at the government level, having a legal mandate for gender responsive budgeting is really key. That's sort of what drives a lot. That's what drives countries to be able to do this, to hold the different ministries and the different levels of government accountable for gender responsive budgeting. Next. We also found that it was really critical to have the different government bodies that prioritize and champion gender issues, making sure that they have the authority and the funding needed to be able to support in gender responsive budgeting. We often found that, ministries of gender, although they had the capacity to be able to support with GRB, they had the knowledge, because of limited authority and limited funding, they were really limited in their ability to ensure that gender responsive budgeting was happening throughout the government. Next slide. Next. Related to that last point, capacity on gender more broadly, as well as GRB, is really critical. We asked questions to government officials about sort of their understanding of gender, and found that, it was pretty mixed. So starting with capacity building within the government to be able to understand gender itself, and then how that translates to budgeting in a way that is gender responsive, is really critical. Next. I think that this is another sort of obvious point, but because budgeting is such a political practice, because you are determining sort of where funding is going, it was something we found in all three countries is that without political will for gender equality and for gender responsive budgeting, the government's ability to be able to carry out gender responsive budgeting is limited. So that's something that maybe civil society groups could carry on, and something that governments should keep in mind as they move forward on their gender responsive budgeting work. Next. And then finally, when we were talking, especially in the local governments, one of the biggest sources of concern was lack of funding to begin with, lack of their own resources. So divvying up the resources becomes a lot easier when there is quite a bit of money to be able to do that. So I think it's important to talk about resource mobilization and resource generation alongside budgeting. So making sure that local governments, national governments are able to generate the resources in order to create budgets that are robust, and budgets that, again, are responsive to the needs of everyone within their country. Next slide. So next, I'll talk about sort of designing a more gender responsive budgeting process. And I just want to highlight here that the budgeting process is just as important as budgeting outcomes when thinking about gender responsive budgeting. So it's not just about kind of the end result and what the budget looks like once it's been created, but the process in which you get there. And so these are some findings on that specific bit of it. So one thing we found was that, you know, I talked about the ministries that focus on gender and them needing capacity and funding to be able to support, but it really should be the Ministry of Finance who leads on gender responsive budgeting. They lead on budgeting to begin with, so they must be accountable for it. And that includes including clear instructions on integrating gender into the different ministries' budgeting processes. Next slide, or next, yep. And then making sure that there are accountability mechanisms throughout the budgeting process to ensure that each level of government, each ministry is thinking about gender. In our desk review, we saw this in places like Rwanda and Uganda. They instituted certificates, for example, to be able to kind of quickly assess whether when they received a budget from a local government or from a ministry that indicated whether that budget was gender responsive. So mechanisms like that, I think, are really critical to be able to support gender responsive budgeting. Next slide. And because all three countries we looked at, Ethiopia, Tanzania, and Ghana, have a pretty decentralized budgeting system, we actually found that led to a lot of opportunities to allow for the needs of women farmers as well as farmers of all genders to be accounted for in the budget. You know, these budgets start at the very local levels, and that gives local government officials the opportunity to go into their communities, talk with members of the communities, and understand what those needs are. So I do think that a lot of the opportunity comes from the local levels, comes from the community levels, and sort of work their way up into the national budgets. Next. And I think lastly on this point, one of the biggest challenges we found both, you know, within when talking with regular people as well as when talking with civil society groups, that not being able to really understand the budget because of the way it's structured, because of the way it's written, is a key barrier in ensuring that gender is being mainstreamed in the budget. So something that governments should consider is creating budgets that are readable, that are understandable by everyday citizens, but also creating a process that is transparent so that all citizens know sort of at what stage in the budgeting process they're in, what that looks like, who can engage, and making sure, right, everyone within the country is aware of how budgets are created and aware of how they can engage and at what stage. Next slide. And finally, I'll end with some notes around engaging women farmers in the budgeting process. Specifically, I think citizen engagement just generally is really important for gender responsive budgeting, but we wanted to understand sort of what are the particular challenges that women farmers face in being able to engage. In all three countries, we saw that there were town halls, there were sort of mechanisms set into place to allow different community members to come and provide their inputs, but there were specific challenges that women faced, and these included sort of culture and gender norms, right? Women not feeling like they were allowed to be in these spaces, feelings of intimidation and fear of violence as one sort of major challenge. Lack of familiarity with the budgeting process. Oftentimes when we asked them about the budget and how they engaged, they didn't really know what we were talking about just because there wasn't enough sort of sensitization and education programs out there that sort of explain the process to them. And then again, lack of communication about planning and budget related meetings. So even though these meetings were happening, they were being held either by local governments or by civil society groups, you know, women not knowing when these meetings were happening or that they were happening at all was a major problem we found. I think lack of trust in the process was also a huge issue. You know, even women who did engage, they really didn't have faith that their inputs would be taken up and that they would see any change in how the government responded to their needs, even when they were able to provide their feedback. And then lastly, women's lack of time to participate. And this goes into a variety of issues. I think one of the major ones we saw was just all the responsibilities that women farmers have within their communities, within their homes. Most of them centered around care, work, caring for their kids, you know, cooking, cleaning, and, you know, time, the lack of time being a big sort of burden for them to be able to engage in these processes. Next slide. And because of all of these challenges, we were able to provide some recommendations and even ask a lot of the women farmers what they would recommend as ways to engage. So in gender responsive budgeting programs, I think we need to incorporate efforts to tackle gender and culture norms that are harmful to women and allow their ability to engage, improved communication on the budgeting process, and thinking about sort of creative ways, right? If women can't read or write, maybe thinking of alternative ways to sort of announce that these options are out there. Alternate methods to gather women's input. So outside of town halls or meetings where women might not feel comfortable, thinking through other ways to gather their inputs and incorporate them into the budgets. And then finally, to help strengthen and create women's groups. We found that when women were engaging in the budgeting process, it was because they were part of a women's group that sort of facilitated that space. Next slide. I think that's it for me. I know I rushed through that very quickly, but happy to answer any questions, and I'll put my email in the chat if folks want to ask me any questions offline. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really helpful to get that perspective of how to make this process work for women and voices from different countries as well. I thought it was interesting that you mentioned the sort of need for improved capacity at government level as one of the findings, and that speaks right back to what our previous speaker, Ms. Njeri Rubin, was talking about in terms of the work carried out in Kenya. Now, it's officially the end of the webinar, but I think we have a few more points we want to cover. So I would ask if you are available to stick around with us for about 5 more minutes so we can give the floor back to Ms. Njeri. We won't share those final slides at this moment. I would just like to ask you please to, wrap up what you were saying. We heard about the context and the gaps, but we'd love to hear some of the actions taken and planned activities to close the gaps around gender responsive budgeting in Kenya. So I'm going to give the floor back now to Ms. Njeri, and then we have a couple questions for our speakers in the Q&A and chat box, one for you, Ms. Rewald, and one for you, Ms. Maziko. So if you can perhaps respond by chat so we capture that during this conversation. So now I'm going to give the floor back to Ms. Njeri for just a few remarks on to wrap up your previous intervention on the process in Kenya. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and apologies for the network loss. And I would like to say that are you able to get back, or it's not possible to get back the presentation?
It's just that we're almost out of time, so we don't have a lot of time to go through all the details. So if you can just take a few minutes to, we left off at the kind of the context and the capacity gaps. So if you could just give us some insights in the work that was carried out and what the next steps are, that would be a great way to conclude your intervention from before. Thank you.
So thank you. From the gaps, we were able now to identify the gaps and the challenges. We were able to come up with the opportunities that are there, where to build on, and it came out very clearly that we needed to strengthen issues of capacity building, and especially sensitizing the departments, and especially the agriculture department, plus the finance and planning department and gender, it came out very clearly that we needed to synergize to be able now to land, to be able to realize our goals in gender and social inclusion in agriculture productivity. So I would say that is the main key thing, that there needs to be a lot of sensitization of the leaders, of the technical people. That came out very clearly by the end of the day. Thank you. It was good to have me on board. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I can ask you one more question, the training materials that were developed, will those be available through the ministry or through FAO Kenya? Because I think they'd be really relevant in other contexts for exactly meeting this capacity gap that exists in other situations.
I believe so. Yeah, it is available. It is available. Okay, maybe what I didn't mention is that we've out of the same, we were able to come up with a curriculum. We developed a curriculum on the thematic areas that were very key, and it's to be rolled out in the institutions, both the technical universities, institutions, and we thought this would come in handy, and we will sensitize. We will be able to get the information across and to build the capacities of the graduates as they go to deliver into their relevant field. Actually, it's not limited to agriculture. It is we saw that it can be applied to several areas, and especially in the incoming projects, program, budgeting sessions, and all that. But the training came in also very key to sensitize everybody that is unaware of gender and social inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks to all for your flexibility and moving around so we could make sure all the speakers could share this wealth of knowledge. Since we're already beyond the time limit of the event, I would like to now give the floor to Ms. Reedy Rajiv Dutta from the UNFCCC, the PCCB network. Reedy, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sybil, and I promise I'll take less than 2 minutes to just wrap this event up. But I guess I wouldn't say welcome because we're at the end of the event, but my name is Riddhi and I support the work of the UNFCCC Capacity Building Subdivision by coordinating the PCCB network, as you can see behind me. So it was a pleasure to be a part of this event. I'd like to extend a warm thanks to both FAO and UNDP, some of our very active network members, for collaborating on this fantastic event that we've seen. As Rosabelle mentioned, cross-cutting issues is a huge thing for the PCCB, its network, and beyond all of our capacity building work at the Secretariat as well. Gender is a huge cross-cutting issue over there as well. And we heard from Rosabelle, who is our working group lead of the PCB on cross-cutting issues. So I guess I want to take the opportunity to thank the organizers for coming together and collaborating on this fantastic event and delivering on it. But just a quick plug to the network. So for everyone else that's joining in and is new to what the network is, there's a comment pinned in the chat where you can look at the PCB network webpage and take a look at what it does. And if you would like to join the network, as long as your organization has some focus on climate action and capacity building related work, you're more than welcome to join. As Rosabelle mentioned, we have over 300 members across sectors, regions, all sorts of stakeholders. And we seek to foster further collaborations like the one that we witnessed today of two very good organizations coming together and delivering a great event. So yeah, we are welcome to join the network. You can also write to us. But besides that, I also want to plug a quick little thing. So COP27 is right around the corner. So in 1 month, the PCCB will be organizing its mandated event at COP, which is the 4th Capacity Building Hub. We're at the 4th year. It's a mandated event that happens every year, where the PCCB brings together the entire capacity building community to deliver different events across different thematic days, all speaking about capacity building. So I'll request my colleague to leave a link to that as well. I mean, it's only 1 month away and a lot of exciting things around that as well. So if you'd like to check that out, that'd be fab. But besides that, I'd also like to thank all of the speakers and the wonderful audience that we've seen so far. I think we had like about 85 people at peak, which goes to show the interest towards the topic. But besides that, I think that's it from me. Back to you, Sybil. Thanks, everyone.
Let me just echo the thanks. Thank you for hosting this event, for tapping into your network to bring all these different perspectives. Just looking at the chat where people were from, we covered across the world and all different types of organizations. Thank you to the speakers. Thank you to Julie for moderating. And yeah, I mean, just looking at the resources in the chat, I'd say we have kind of a university course here in terms of materials to guide us. And I leave here today feeling completely inspired by all of these positive examples. You know, this change is not always easy, but clearly it's happening. So congratulations for all of the accomplishments and look forward to opportunities to collaborate in the future. I wish you a wonderful rest of your day or evening and thank you. Hope to see you again soon. Goodbye, everyone.